The whole inside of this lid is filled with cat hair. Love that for me. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime? Yes, definitely said Crue Trime. So glad to see you. Welcome back. I already said that. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you're in the right place. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. So today's story was recommended by a couple of lovely viewers named Liz and Lindsay Kastuk. Did I say that right? Thank you, ladies, because you picked a doozy. So fair warning for everybody, this story involves children. So if you want to pass this week, blame it on Liz and Lindsay, okay? This is the story of Andrea Yates. Okay, I'm trying this new thing where I don't make disclaimers and tell you a bunch of stuff that I've told you a million times before, but you know, this right here, just look. Description box. Although I definitely started this video with a disclaimer. Anyways, let's just get started. On June 20th, 2001 at 9:48 a.m., Houston, Texas 911 received a call to respond to 942 Beachcomber Street. The caller told the operator that she needed an ambulance, but didn't say why. The operator kept asking what happened, what was wrong, but the caller, 36-year-old Andrea Yates, wouldn't say. Shortly after calling 911, Andrea hung up and then called her husband, Rusty Yates. She asked him to come home. It was an emergency. He asked if it was something to do with the children. Were they hurt? She said yes. He said who? She said all of them. When the police arrived, they found 4 children soaking wet, all lying together in the main bedroom, holding hands, and they were all dead. The oldest child, a boy named Noah, was found face down in the bathtub, also dead. All 5 children had drowned. How did we get here? Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on July 2nd, 1964 in Houston, Texas to Utah? Kohler and Andrew Emmett Kennedy. Andrea was the youngest of 5 children, and it was a very religious household. Ooh, it is hot. Okay, let me secure my hair. It's making me crazy today. Andrea was a very quiet child, devoted to family, and from a young age, Andrea's intelligence was very apparent. Very smart girl. In high school, she was an excellent student. She was the captain of the swim team, historian of the National Honor Society. She graduated from Milby High School in 1982 as the valedictorian. That's like the smartest in the class. So after high school, Andrea went to the University of Houston where she completed a nursing program. She graduated from the Texas Health Science Center at Houston in 1986, and then she worked as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center from 1986 to 1994. So she was just, quiet, living her life, studying, being a nurse, but she did meet a young man who lived in the same apartment complex as her. It was the Sunscape Apartments, and it was the summer of 1989. She met her soon-to-be husband, NASA engineer Russell Yates. It seems to me like Russell was the only person that she ever dated. She was too busy getting good grades and concentrating on learning to be a nurse, so didn't leave a whole lot of time for dates. Also, remember, she grew up in a very religious, conservative family, so the decision to date somebody came with a pretty serious intention to eventually marry them. Well, Andrea and Rusty were actually a very good match because he was also quite religious and they shared the same values when it came to traditional family structure, how to raise children, traditional marriage roles.
God talks about a wife doing her husband good and not evil all the days of her life.
You get what I'm saying. After they were married on April 17th, 1993, they moved in together and got started on building that family right away. So both Andrea and Rusty wanted to have as many children as possible. Well, meaning that they were gonna leave that up to God, I guess. Less than a year into their marriage, they welcomed their first child, a boy that they named Noah Jacob, on February 2nd, 1994. So once Jacob was born, Andrea was perfectly happy to stay home and care for the baby, hopefully the first of many. In her mind, she's a mom now. You know, that's what moms do. Everyone, including Rusty, Andrea's friends and family, they all said that she was a fantastic mother. She was very patient, warm, loving, gentle, even-tempered, you know, just like a good mom. Pretty much immediately after the first child was born, Andrea started having dreams and visions of like blood and knives. She was having some pretty intrusive thoughts of stabbing someone or hurting the kids. Well, these thoughts and visions, you know, scared Andrea. She thought it was the voice of literally the devil.
I'm the devil, and I'm here to say I'm the most evil rapper in the USA. All my homies and my bitches say hi.
She obviously never encountered anything like this before. She loved her baby, she loved her family, she loved being a mom. She didn't connect the thoughts in the visions to having just had a baby. And she kept everything a secret, you know. She didn't want to worry anybody, and she just didn't want to acknowledge it, you know, but we'll come back to that. On December 15th, 1995, they had a second child. They named John Samuel. About a year later, Rusty took a 6-month NASA project somewhere in Florida. So the little family packed up and they moved in November of 1996. I mentioned that Rusty and Andrea were pretty religious, and Rusty was actually very deep into evangelical Christian ideals. He'd become very close to a radical preacher that he'd met in college named Michael Warrenecki. Under Michael's influence, you know, Rusty started thinking that his life with Andrea was too materialistic. Remember, he's a NASA engineer. He's doing fine. He was thinking that they owned too much. They weren't focused enough on God. So when they moved, they sold most of their possessions and they leased their 4-bedroom house in suburban Houston, Texas. And instead of moving into like a home, they moved into a camper in an RV park in Seminole, Florida. While Rusty went to work every day, Andrea stayed home in this 38-foot trailer with the 2 young toddlers. So Rusty was like the head of the household. You know, he was going out to work, he was bringing home the bacon, and Andrea was doing everything else, including care for the kids, all of it. A third son, Paul Abraham, was born on September 13th, 1997. Now, remember, they're living in a camper with 2 toddlers, so, like, they sure didn't mind getting busy with, like, 2 kids within arm's reach. Damn.
You have many things that you can do that for him in many areas.
By the way, Andrea had actually suffered a miscarriage after the birth of the second child, John, and during that time she had gotten really close to Warrenecki's wife, Rachel. They were exchanging a lot of letters and phone calls, and at this time, the Warreneckis were essentially spiritual guides to the Yates family. Spiritual guides, you say? What do you mean? Glad you asked. So Michael Warrenecki, whatever. He was a self-proclaimed prophet of the Lord with a direct connection to Jesus. As a young man in the early 70s, he was very athletic and he got a full-ride football scholarship to Central Michigan University with plans to go pro. But in 1974, Michael hurt his knee badly enough that he was no longer able to play, and this was devastating. You know, his football dreams were pretty much over. The guy went full blast Jesus. You know, he was convinced that his football injury was God's way of breaking him of his pride, some kind of tool to use him to receive the gospel. He went on to graduate from Central Michigan with a degree in behavioral science, and then he eventually landed at the Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, where he got his Master's of Divinity in 1980. So he was super duper deep into charismatic Christian evangelism. He returned to his home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and started his own church. So the guy was just like really aggressive. That was his style. You know, he was described as unconventional.
If you want to learn something about God, shut your mouth and listen to me for a minute.
He had very strong ideals. You know, they were very rigid. He said that most, if not all, of the world was filled with evil, And most organized religion had diluted God's true message, which, by the way, was that women are subservient to men. Michael and his wife and children were like traveling street corner preachers with a focus on college campuses. Now, they weren't traveling because of the freedom of it. They were traveling because he was so wild, they were getting like chased out of town, like legal problems.
My crew is big and it keeps getting bigger. That's 'cause Jesus Christ is...
Michael was preaching at the Auburn University campus in the mid-1980s when he first met Rusty Yates. Rusty was also an athlete. You know, he was on a full ride scholarship to Auburn to play football. Well, Michael gave Rusty some Jesus literature and they kept in touch by letters and phone calls and eventually then videos and newsletters. In 1989, Rusty introduced Michael and his wife to his new girlfriend, Andrea. The extremely magnetic Michael and his wife and their 6 kids traveled around in a tour bus to preach on street corners. He had very strong views on women. Did I mention this already? He said that, quote, "A woman is created to be a helper, and this does not mean a wife. It means a servant." If a girl does not know how to be a servant, then she is learning how to be a ruler, and that is witchcraft. Okay, Michael.
You gonna rot in hell for making light of that.
No, I won't.
He called women wicked, evil, and weak, daughters of Eve, and he believed that all women inherited their witchcraft nature from Eve and have the spirit of Jezebel, so they should be a servant of man, and man should have dominion over the women. Charming. So nice. Okay, so you get it. Like, Michael has very strong views about a woman's role in the home and in a marriage, and also that their children need to be protected from the secular world of evil, demonic influence. Homeschool your kids, protect them, no outside music, no TV, none of that stuff. I need to put on eyebrows. And I'll be right back. So, in 1998, the NASA project in Florida was wrapping up and the Yates family headed back to Texas. But they didn't return to their 4-bedroom house in suburban Houston, even though Andrea was pregnant again. Instead, Rusty purchased a 360 square foot Greyhound bus from Michael Warrenecki. It's funny to me that Michael Warrenecki is preaching this idea about like austere living, being frugal and all that stuff, but he can sell a bus to one of his followers? Okay. Not surprising at all, Rusty was said to be very controlling of Andrea. She wasn't allowed to really have friends, you know, that weren't approved, or go anywhere without Rusty. Because of Warrenecki's teachings, public school was demonic and Andrea was homeschooling the children. Rusty was always concerned about being wasteful, so Andrea was only allowed to use cloth diapers with the children. The children that she was raising in a fucking bus, by the way. Can you imagine? There's like 4 kids in diapers in a bus. On February 15th, 1999, a 4th son, Luke David, was born. And Andrea was also helping to take care of her father, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. By the way, after each one of the births of the kids, things would just get worse and worse. Remember, like, the voices and the visions and all that stuff? It would eventually kind of stabilize, I guess, but after every birth, it would come back with a vengeance, and it would just get worse and worse. So now they're back in Texas, living on this bus. She's got 4 kids, remember, in cloth diapers, homeschooling, and a father in declining health. Andrea was struggling big time. Not only was she having these visions, these intrusive thoughts, she started having auditory hallucinations too. She was hearing voices saying things like, "Get a knife, get a knife, get a knife." She was really worried that she was going to hurt the kids. Andrea was withdrawn and, quiet, mostly silent, like catatonic, for weeks. On June 16th of 1999, she was crying and hysterical. She called Rusty at work and begged him to come home. When he got there, he found her, kind of curled up in the bus, chewing on her fingers. She was like, I need help. I need to go to the hospital. And I need somebody to keep me there so that I won't hurt the kids. So these secret murder thoughts that she was having were sending her into a spiral. And if you're expecting a big reaction from Rusty, don't hold your breath. So the only support system she has is Rusty and her religious zealot friend, she does have her parents, and they are religious too, but they're not like Warrenecki religious. Well, essentially doing nothing, Rusty then did pack her up and take her to her mother's house. The spiral continued, and Andrea intentionally overdosed on some medication that she found in the home. It's unclear to me, was it her dad's, was it her mother's? Either way, it wasn't hers, and she took it on purpose, wanting to eliminate herself from the equation. After this episode, she was hospitalized, which was the best thing for her, and she started talking to counselors and doctors. She apparently felt like Satan's presence was all around her, influencing her. She was so afraid that her parenting choices were gonna send her kids to hell. She was so afraid of how the kids were going to turn out and it be her fault. You know what I mean? That the kids would grow up to be homosexuals or serial killers or, something in her mind terrible. I mean, a serial killer is terrible, but you get what I'm saying. The doctors had her on some pretty serious medication, like a variety of things. And I'm not going to go into the details of which medications she was on, but they did help, at least for a time. The problem is she would take these medications, they would be effective, she would feel good, and then be like, oh, I'm good. I'm cured. I don't need to continue taking these meds. Which is a problem because if you're not consistent, it can really make things worse. On top of that, she was so wrapped up in this religious stuff. They were at the forefront of her family life. It was really her priority to, adhere to them, but they were inconsistent with some of her therapies. So after that episode, she did return home. In July of 1999, Rusty found Andrea in the bathroom with a knife. She was begging Rusty to allow her to do it. You know what? She was admitted to the hospital again, put on a wild cocktail of medications, antidepressants, antipsychotics. There was also some complications with her health insurance coverage, and it was just bad. The whole thing was just really, really, really bad. Andrea Yates was suffering from postpartum psychosis, or PPP. So postpartum psychosis is quite rare. It is believed to be brought on by the dramatic hormone shifts that result from pregnancy and birth. PPP impacts roughly 1 in 1,000 mothers. So it's an abrupt onset of psychotic symptoms that appear right after childbirth, normally within 2 weeks to a month. The symptoms include delusions, hallucinations, incoherent speech or, mute, confusion, disorganized thoughts, severe difficulty sleeping, depression, agitation, mania. It's very, very different from postpartum depression, which is pretty commonly discussed these days. Those symptoms include, extreme sadness, low energy, anxiety, crying episodes, irritability. What separates the two is that PPP involves delusions and hallucinations, and postpartum depression is, it's depression. Now, I am not a mental health professional at all, so if you or someone you love might be suffering from either of these conditions, consult a doctor. Postpartum depression is actually quite common, and both of these conditions are treatable. They're treatable. Okay, well, after that knife episode, and by the way, there were many other episodes. Andrea was very ill. She was struggling. She was in a cycle. Things were just really, really bad. But after that knife episode, Rusty Yates finally sold that godforsaken bus, and they finally moved back into an actual house, in October of 1999. Andrea's psychiatrist that she was seeing urged her and Rusty to stop having children.
Doing so would surely guarantee future psychotic depression.
Andrea's condition was so fragile that, having another pregnancy would just pretty much guarantee another psychotic break. And by the way, they would just get worse and worse.
Did you and Andrea, maybe given the circumstances, say maybe we've had enough kids, we shouldn't have any more?
Well, no.
So Rusty and Andrea decided that they would be able to easily recognize the symptoms and they would easily be able to seek intervention. Also, remember their religion commands them to have as many children as possible, keep that quiver full, 7 weeks later, Andrea fell pregnant, 5th child. She went off her meds until she gave birth on November 30th, 2000 to a baby girl that they named Mary Deborah. So after Mary was born, Andrea returned to the care of her psychiatrist, and under his supervision, she seemed to improve. She seemed to be coping quite well until her father passed away in March of 2001. At that point, Andrea stopped taking her meds altogether, and she started having delusions and hallucinations. By the end of the month, Andrea was just fully catatonic. She stopped nursing the baby, she stopped bathing. She was actually hospitalized against her will on March 31st of 2001. So Rusty had actually sought a different treatment facility, and this time he did all the talking, that she was having trouble after giving birth and losing her father, but he didn't tell him anything about Andrea's hallucinations or thinking or delusional ideas. Andrea wasn't super talkative either, remember? And also, it was her first time meeting this new doctor, so she wasn't giving him all the details. So after that episode, Andrea was kind of in and out of inpatient treatment, but she didn't seem to be declining, so she was released and sent home again. I mean, you get it. It's like this infinite loop of just like bad decisions. These medical interventions worked for less and less time, and she would decline faster and faster in between episodes. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Rusty made sure that Andrea took her medications, her antidepressants, before he left for work. His mother was due to come over within the hour to help Andrea with the kids. So while the kids ate their breakfast, Andrea filled up the bathtub with water. What else was she filling it up with? One by one, she took each child to the bathroom and held them down under the water until they died. So the order of the children, I don't know, is significant at all. I think she sort of did it in the order of, most compliant child. 3-year-old Paul was first, then 2-year-old Luke, then 5-year-old John, then infant 6-month-old Mary. She carried each of the children to the main bedroom, laid them down in her bed, linked their hands together like they were holding hands. The oldest child, 7-year-old Noah, she actually left in the bathtub. For whatever reason, maybe she was so far in her delusion, she didn't realize what she was doing, forgot what she was doing. I don't know. So now we're back where we started. Andrea called 911 and then called Rusty. The police arrived to an unbelievable scene. Andrea was emotionless, by the way, confessed right away, told them everything. Everything. She was taken into custody. Rusty eventually did make it home, but they would not let him inside the house. He pretty quickly was giving interviews, and he was very supportive of Andrea.
A day after he lost all of his children, he clutched a family photo and voiced his support for Andrea.
I mean, not supportive of what she did, but he was open about her struggles with mental illness. She wasn't an evil person. That wasn't her who did that. Andrea told investigators that she was worried that her children were going to go to hell because she was a bad mom. She said that they did silly stuff and were disobedient. They misbehaved. They weren't righteous. They didn't do things God likes. 7, 5, 3, 2, and 6-month-old children. When asked what she was trying to accomplish by what she did, Andrea said of the children, maybe in their innocent years, God would take them up. Her mind, in addition to being incredibly ill, was so mind-melted with this religious stuff that she thought it was better for her to kill the children than for them to grow up to be not godly enough.
You're gonna die in there! All of you! You are gonna die!
Andrea Yates was charged with 5 counts of capital murder. She was determined to be mentally competent for trial, by the way. So in February of 2002, the trial began. Andrea pled not guilty by reason of insanity. According to statistics and Texas law, 75% of insanity pleas end in failure. In Texas, the insanity defense criteria, it's 2-pronged. The defendant must A, have a mental defect or disease, and B, not know that their actions are wrong. They don't know the difference between right and wrong. And remember, she had been found mentally competent to stand trial regardless of her long history of mental illness. The state's case focused on how Andrea waited until Rusty left for work to drown the children. And as I mentioned, Rusty's mother was supposed to be coming over by 10 a.m. to help her with the kids, so she wouldn't be left alone with them. In Andrea's interviews, she had also described how she methodically selected each child. When she got to the last one, he realized what was going on and he tried to run away from her. She chased him around the house to drown him in the bathtub.
Instantly, I was like, yeah, no.
Well, the defense argued that she was just too sick, too mentally ill to understand what was going on, what she had done. They played some clips of her interviews, that she had done with psychiatrists after her arrest, where she said some really bizarre, nonsensical kind of things. Also, they introduced the teachings and the influence of Michael Warrenecki, the actual garbage person. I'm going to say it, okay? Don't care. In Andrea's interviews, she was parroting word for word his teachings. They're very extreme. She was wicked because she was a daughter of Eve.
That type of woman does not have the Holy Spirit. So that type of woman is going to be used by the devil to destroy you.
Satan was coming for the children because of it. She was convinced that Satan was just living within her. And after being in custody for a while and getting back on her meds and stabilized, the horror and grief started to set in when she came kind of back to reality. The prosecution also brought in a psychiatrist named Dr. Dietz. He had interviewed Andrea for about 20 hours at that point, and he had submitted a 100-page report to the court. He was also a technical advisor for the television show Law & Order. He described an episode where a mother drowned her child in a bathtub and then pretended to be, insane to get out of the jail sentence. Andrea was also a regular watcher of Law & Order, and it was their belief that she got the idea from this episode. So after 3 weeks of testimony and arguments, the jury deliberated for 3.5 hours, and they returned a verdict of guilty. They imposed life in prison with parole possible after 40 years. Now remember, that's 40 years that have to be served per count, so she's never getting out. Well, shortly after that verdict was announced, long story short, the Law & Order episode was debunked. So a producer from Law & Order verified that Dietz was a technical advisor, but he was describing an episode that did not exist. For that reason, Andrea was granted a new trial. In June of 2006, the second trial went on much like the first, but this time without the Dietz testimony and any of the Law & Order stuff. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity, but she was still sent away to a mental institution for treatment for the rest of her life. So Andrea Yates, at the time of the end of these trials, had been diagnosed with postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. Probably some other things too. She was sent to a high-security unit at the North Texas State Hospital in Vernon, Texas. Then in 2007, she was moved to a lower security unit at the Kerrville State Hospital in Kerrville, Texas. Andrea has said as recently as 2022 that she grieves every day for her children. She does feel like she's exactly where she needs to be. The bottom line there is that she can't leave the mental facility until she requests a review, and it's been 17 years. She's not ready. Andrea's defense team started the Yates Children Memorial Fund, which is dedicated to women's mental health, particularly postpartum mental health. They have joined forces with Postpartum Support International, and they provide services to women all over the world. There's a toll-free number down in the description box that you can call if you or someone you know needs help. They provide support, resources, referrals, and it's all for free. So I kind of went back and forth with how I was going to wrap this story. I feel bad for Andrea Yates. I think she was very ill. She was suffering. She was not getting the care and attention that she needed. And I think she had forces and influences in her life that were very dangerous to her. Russell Yates has done many interviews about this story, and he has never wavered in his support for Andrea.
Because of that mental illness, you're not angry with her, you don't blame her for what happened?
I don't blame her a bit.
But let's not let's not saint him quite yet. He brought this Michael Warnecki into her life. He was involved with getting her pregnant over and over after being advised, let's not do that, dangerous. It's my view that he viewed her mental illness as like the flu, that's something that she would just get over easily, and having a child was worth the suffering.
Would we rather have not had Luke? I mean, of course, we'd rather have Luke.
Easy for you to say, Rusty. Anyways, this Michael Warnecki, still out there being a garbage person. Beware, I guess. And that is the story of Andrea Yates. Thanks again to Liz and Lindsay for this terrible story. It's a bad one. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube often, and you can follow me on most of the socials as well. If you're interested to know any of the makeup that I used on my face today, look down in the description box. I link everything, and if something's not available, I'll find you something similar. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Let me get my fucking life together instead to a lower Rusty Yates. Oh no. Instead. To the lower security. All